about to begin. We want to welcome you to the Vampire and Devil Show. We want to welcome you to the Vampire and Devil Show. It's gonna be bloody fun. We're gonna kill everyone. Welcome to the Vampire and Devil Show. With lots of blood and lots of guts. Two horror fanatics and rock and roll nuts. Welcome to the Vampire and Devil Show.
Fangs, ghouls, 1, 2, vampire and devil are coming for you. Hey, devil, do you think our fangs like scary movies? I know we do.
Yeah, I would hope they like the scary movies.
Absolutely. You know they love those scary movies. So we're going to talk about a lot of scary movies tonight because, hey, my beloved devil, it is the late great Wes Craven episode this evening as we break down a lot of fun things in his catalog, man. I mean, dude, Wes is Wes. And, bro, almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years next year.
Yeah. And like I said, even throughout all these episodes that we have done so far, we have touched a little bit on some Wes Craven, the movies. And, we'll talk a little bit about those movies that we did. But, we got to go and give the full boat and the full love of Wes Craven movies. And, he's one of my favorite film directors. And, we're thinking about, which directors we want to do for this season. And, we did the George Romero one. We had to go with that one. And I'm like, we got to go with Wes Craven, especially because, like I said, a lot of the movies that we've talked about this year have been Wes Craven movies. So it's like, let's just go mamby-pamby around the bushes and let's just talk about Wes and his body of work.
Absolutely, man, 100%. And I suppose there's no way to start off discussing Wes Craven where a lot of people might assume, rightfully so, that we would jump right into those heavy hitters. But just like we discussed when it came to George, we gotta feel that we gotta show the same respect when it comes to Wes and start at the beginning. So I think you and I should take a stroll down the block real quick, brother. Why don't you and I take a little walk down the street and let's go visit the last house on the left.
Yeah, when you go through most people's list of directors who have made movies throughout their careers, and you look at their first ones and the middles and the last ones, not too many movies are as extreme, violent, insanely kind of gory, especially for its time. This movie was, Last Time on the Left was made in the 70s, early 70s. So, this movie was, way above its time when it came to the type of movies that eventually in the 80s, the 90s, and nowadays with more of the kind of torture, revenge kind of films. This one kind of, broke the mold for that kind of movie. I mean, a lot of people, talk about, it being one of the most controversial films, especially at that time.
Yeah, it definitely is a movie that you would think would fall in the line of a potential cancel target during this day and age. Because there's some questionable like camera shooting based on age, but it's always been also iconically known as it's just a movie. It's just a movie.
Yeah, and getting into this movie and stuff like that, especially, starting off, it's a hard movie to watch, sometimes because of how realistically it was shot and how viciously these actors and actresses were working, with each other to make it seem logistic. Like we've talked about it before with, Cannibal Corpse, Cannibal Holocaust, thinking about, having to go to court and thinking things really happen. I would assume that a lot of this probably did the same thing where people were like, oh my God, did we really witness this person's death on film or something like that? But yeah, it's crazy. And, looking back into it now, it's, years later you have, movies, but this movie kind of brought a lot of Friday the 13th people in it because there's two people who are connected with this movie that were part of the Friday the 13th series as far as directing wise and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, this movie was really, really, really hardcore. And, at that time they wanted to slap, the NC-17 on it and stuff like that because of the the implements of what happens in this movie. But yeah, it's such a crazy movie to like, especially like I said, for us to start off with, I mean, most directors you're kind of talking about some of their body of works and stuff like that, but to go straight into probably Wes's most controversial movie.
And that's the thing, though, brother. It's really interesting that you brought up the whole NC-17 thing because, again, at that time, especially, there was a lot of juggling when it came to that. I mean, you had movies like The Exorcist that came out in the 70s that, were really like pushing the boundaries of what they were doing. They had movies like A Clockwork Orange that came out in the 70s that were dealing with all kinds of crazy topics like that. So, I mean, it's definitely insane. And interesting when you discuss like how they were like teetering on the edge of like the NC-17 rating, and just like what we talked about a second ago too, because one of the kind of the craziest scenes in there is that you've got a shot that is dealing with like nudity, which of course is not uncommon for the genre, but it's an actress that's playing a 17-year-old though.
Yeah. It was like, one of these things where, when you see it in a movie, she's supposed to be young, and then, obviously, she's not. But yeah, there's a lot of crazy scenes in this movie. There's been talks before, but I've heard some say it was real. I've heard some of the actress now apparently saying it's not real. But in the one part in the movie where they make her piss her pants. Supposedly, I heard stories that she really did pee her pants, but now there's stories coming out saying that it was like special effects tubes and stuff like that. But yeah, like I said, this movie is like got crazy stuff in it. It has a deputy that you know of
Yep.
from the Karate Kid and Cobra Kai with John Kreese as a
Yep.
bubbling horrible. Like those guys were like the worst two sheriff detectives in the entire world. Like man, like they're knowing that this car was missing, and then all of a sudden, this look out. Oh wait, that was the car that we got. Oh. Then they forget to get gas, and the car, their police car breaks down, and it was like basically your bubbling, redneck kind of town. But yeah, I mean like, but like the whole movie itself though is just, these guys coming in, these kids going out to the city to look for some drugs and meet up with these people, and these guys are like basically killers, and they like you get into this intensive kill scene and rape scene and the way they're degrading her and stuff like that throughout this movie. But then, obviously in crazy fashion too, of course, they just happen to stumble upon the house that happens to be her house. And, they notice that they're wearing a necklace that the daughter just got. And, the parents, not unlike, nowadays where, you call them the cops or something like that, they're like, no, we're gonna fuck these people up home style.
That they definitely do, and that's such a crazy intro to a director's career. Like we
Yeah,
touched about it before. I mean, a lot of directors, they kind of dip their toe in, maybe pussyfoot around certain things, but this is a really crazy movie to just tee off your career with. And then it just kind of continues as we move into, like, you know, cannibals and, body dysmorphia and almost like living out in like apocalyptic type areas in The Hills Have Eyes.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it goes from like that brutalness of the last house on the left to a sort of brutalness even in this movie. You know what I mean? You have another rape scene even in this movie. So it's like this, like this torture kind of genre starting out and stuff like that when this Hills Have Eyes. I mean, I liked the original one. I think the original Hills Have Eyes is an awesome thing. I think it's kind of funny and iconic and ironic too that your main guy that's on the poster is like a kind of a footnote in the movie. He's not even the main baddie, which was Michael Berryman.
Right. I've always thought that was a trip, and he's always been so heavily like featured and stuff, and he's just a guy in that movie. Don't get me wrong, when I met Michael Berryman, that's absolutely what I had him sign, was right
Yeah.
on my DVD for The Hills Have Eyes, because he's the guy right on the DVD cover. But it is just kind of crazy too, because like it almost kind of reminds me of almost a slightly flipped version of Hellraiser, because if you know of Clive Barker's, the books that inspired Hellraiser, Pinhead was just a guy. Butterball was the guy. But then I guess, without going too deeply into that, that's for a conversation for another time, but I guess they just didn't find the backstory of Butterball to be interesting enough for cinematography to warrant him being the leader. Or I guess they found Pinhead to just be much more of a dynamic character with a cooler backstory to really be the leader of the Cenobites. So I always found that to be kind of interesting, how things like that can happen. But yeah, Michael Berryman's character, he's just, he's just a vicious guy, but a guy nonetheless. But he's always been so heavily focused as the main guy that's associated with The Hills Have Eyes.
Yeah, yeah. And then, when we're talking about The Hills Have Eyes, a lot of people know about the scene, which I was like, we always talk about this on the show with Miss Vamp and the dogs being killed.
Yes.
It's always like, you know what I mean? Like in this movie, yeah, I mean, you have these two German shepherds in this movie that were kind of like one was kind of a badass, the other one kind of didn't last for too long, became food for these mutant creatures that were sort of like, it was kind of weird because like you said, it's very apocalyptic, but very kind of like rednecky sort of too. So it's like a combination of like a backwoods redneck serial killer cannibals and meets like like a nuclear kind of like family, kind of like what it is. Which I mean, we can talk about it a little bit now because with the sequels and stuff like that, and the remakes, where the remake of Hills Have Eyes kind of played off a little bit more of that, post, nuclear blast test area, which was what created these mutant creatures.
Yeah, it's a little like Mad Maxy, almost kind of meets a little bit of like Trauma. You know what I mean? But not in the low budget way. Just the fact that Trauma, the movie company Trauma always kind of built a couple of their franchises in Class of Nukem High and the Toxic Avenger, based around like nuclear waste and stuff like that. So it's kind of got that same kind of feel with it. But yeah, it's also got a little bit of like that Mad Maxy feel as far as like the way that the Earth is, but obviously just without the crazy cars.
Yeah, yeah. And then, you kind of, start getting out of the 70s realm for Wes Craven. And I started off with the 1981 Deadly Blessing Wes Craven movie, which I hadn't seen in a long time. It'd been a while since I'd seen it and completely forgot that it was one of Sharon Stone's first, like, actual speaking roles.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and was like one of her like main roles, and it's cool because it deals with this like religious fascination that she has with like her neighbors, and so it's got this kind of like religion meets like almost a bit of paranormal activity like to it. Not paranormal activity, the movie, just paranormal activity kind of feel to it. But the thing that's also funny too is like a follow up to is we get the return of Pluto in this
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like right back into Berryman being in this, and yeah, This movie is very similar. Even they mentioned it in the movie where they asked if they were Amish, but they're not Amish. It's like it's a other religion that's a fake religion in this movie, but it's really sort of based on the Amish traditions and stuff like that in this movie. But yeah, like it had like that paranoia where those people believe that everybody here is a succubus and a hell spawn and all that kind of stuff. When we see them and they're all over with no electricity, and we're like, you guys are all a bunch of backwoods people. So it kind of had that, like, where the old time kind of like Amish sort of community versus like the us with all our modern technology kind of horror into it, but with that little bit of, like you said, that little supernatural kind of
Super.
touch to it, because it definitely had, like, where, there was like, some stuff going on. It had a lot of cool death scenes in this, in Debbie Blessing. I like the death by tractor is probably one of my favorite ones. You don't see that too often. And within this movie too, there's a lot of crazy stuff that that eventually plays on later on in some horror movies. But you have the unveiling that the person that was the main killer was actually a man and not a female, which
Yeah.
everybody in this movie assumed that Faith was a female, and you find out that eventually Faith was a male. The only part of this movie that I was kind of weirded about was the whole, at the end there actually was a succubus that comes out of the ground and pulls like the person in it. So to me, I thought that ending was kind of weird, but apparently it was imposed onto West to add that into. I guess like we've talked about on this series, on our episodes many times before, where sometimes the producers or the head of the companies and stuff like that are like, yeah, you need to put this in your movie. And when you're a director that doesn't have as much pull, because at this time West was, we know West now, but at that time he was still that kind of beginning struggling horror director, because like you said, last house on the left, and Hills Have Eyes weren't huge major blockbusters that they are now. I mean, now they're kind of like cult movies, but at that time they made money where they were enough for him to continue his career, but they were not they weren't the huge blockbusters that eventually, when we get down this line of Wes Craven movies, are the where later on in his career, he had a little bit more pull and he can say, like, yeah, I'm not doing that. But at this movie, yeah, it was really, really bad.
Yeah, it was just kind of weird, but I mean, it was close enough to kind of making sense because of that whole kind of like crazy religious Amish, almost kind of Children of the Corn thing, that it kind of worked. But yeah, there is a little part of me that's like, I wish that it had been left out and they just hadn't, you know. Again, it just kind of sucks that it got imposed on West. But I will say, you know, it wasn't such a train wreck addition at the end of a movie that to completely derail the enjoyment and crazy coolness of that movie. I still thought the movie overall is pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, and then speaking of we were talking about like the craziness and the kookiness and stuff like that, it basically jumps right into Wes directing what would be sort of a canon film. It's sort of like when Tim Burton did Batman, you got Wes Craven all of a sudden does the Swamp Thing movie,
Swamp Thing.
which I love. This is my Swamp Thing that I grew up with. I wasn't a huge, I had friends of mine that were big comic book fans, but like I love this movie. I love Adrian Barbeau. I love the campiness of this. It's you watch, especially watching it now. It's so cliche '80s. It's not even funny.
Right. No, it definitely is. Like it's and it's funny because I touched on trauma in like the previous thing when we were talking about like the hills. It's like this is Wes Craven's Toxic Avenger.
Yeah. And then just like most directors, like we were talking about with Michael Berryman being in The Hills Have Eyes and then Deadly Blessing,
They have
we've
their
got
favorites.
we got Krug from Last of the House on the Left making an appearance back in, being the jackass that he is in this movie, being a complete asshole and basically almost kind of sort of the same character. I don't know if he was being typecasted by Wes, but he always played these like maniacal like asshole people that you just wanted to be killed.
Yeah, you really did. Like it was just you regularly, especially in horror movies, you just regularly are just waiting for just that guy to just get their just desserts and just be like, I really just want something. In the words of Wednesday 13, I want bad things to happen to you.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It was, but like I said, yeah. I mean, I love that. And then we continue on with the is the sequel of Hills Have Eyes 2, which I wasn't too big of a fan of. I
Yeah.
thought I mean, I thought it was decent, but it was one of those ones where you know did we need a sequel to it? Maybe not as much, but they were just like, hey man, let's just try to tap into, something we've tapped into before and see if that works.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. Like, I mean, it was all right. I can't. It's not one of those sequels that I sit back on and am just root for it just never happening at all. I can't be that brutal on it because also at the time I think it does speak a little bit into the fact that you know Wes is building his own career. He's becoming much more known, and with being known involves certain opportunities. And again, just like we had discussed, is that The Hills Have Eyes had started developing that cult following. And when it comes to cult movies, people want their sequels, and it's funny because the people that want their sequels demand that it be a good sequel. But then when you get your sequel and it falls flat, you're just kind of pissed at the world. And don't get me wrong, I get it. If they're gonna make a sequel to a movie that you love, then of course you want it to be good. You want it to continue on the legacy in a certain way. And we we'll have discussions and there's so many movies that have sequels that fall flat. There's also so many movies that have sequels that are really solid and really good. And so, this just happens to be one of those, I guess what you would call the sophomore slump, but it wasn't so much for his directorial follow-up, because his directorial follow-up was excellent. It just happens to be for this particular, franchise. This one was more of a miss than a hit.
Yeah. And then we pull into where I would say 99.9% of Wes Craven fans start becoming Wes Craven fans, and that
The
is
the franchise.
the franchise of all franchises. Well, I mean, some people will argue, with certain which franchise is the biggest and which franchise the best between Nightmare on Elm Street and the Halloween series and the
Yeah,
Jason series.
I just
But
mean
this,
for Wes.
yeah, this was the one. This was what solidified Wes as I'm gonna be a big time film director for the horror genre, and I'm not going anywhere. And this is what the movie that put his name on the map, which obviously, like we said, we're talking about the original Nightmare on Elm Street, where this one is other than Dream Warriors, I think this one's my favorite of all of them, only because I love the seriousness and the scariness of this movie and the dark undertones. There's some crazy stuff, like when her friend's being dragged through the hallway in the school. You have her on the ceiling being bloodily murdered. Got Johnny Depp being sucked and killed, and
Sucked into hell.
yeah, so I mean, like this movie to me, like where the sequence of the continuations of the Nightmare on Elm Street series started getting a little bit more of him being a little more comical, a little bit more funny. Where I like this one, even though there was some of those one-liners in this movie, it wasn't. It was kind of a afterthought where this was more scary, and the rest of the series, even though I do love the series, I love all the Nightmare movies. um this one I think is my favorite one overall, just because it's a real horror movie, and it's not playing on that campiness.
Yeah, when we're talking Nightmare on Elm Street, it is my number two. Only because, like you had mentioned, when it comes to Dream Warriors for me, it hits so hard when it comes to the kills, the cast, and the soundtrack. Like, that's just a three-headed monster that hit all the right buttons at the right time. So, I do go back to Dream Warriors more than any other Nightmare on Elm Street. But it is, for me, 100% Dream Warriors, the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and then everybody else. And we're going to get into a little bit later a very specifically unique Nightmare on Elm Street that we'll get into later. But yeah, just for Dream Warriors, it just hits so heavily on those three aspects for me that I have to give it the win if I'm ranking the movies. But 100%, it is the best movie of the franchise when it's setting the tone and then delivering on a promise, but sticking to the right aspects of the horror genre.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
you've got the introduction of people who became stars. You also have the introduction of people who became megastars. Heather Langenkamp's done many, many movies all across the board, and of course Johnny Depp became Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
So there's just so much when it comes to that. But you're 100% right. I mean, the more darker, serious tones, like the real preying on your fears, is what just gives the original Nightmare on Elm Street just so much credibility and just so much staying power. And it's just so incredibly excellent. And again, it gives us Freddy Krueger. It gives us the guy. It gives us the glove. It gives us the Christmas sweater. It gives us the fedora, and it's just really, really interesting. And again, it's very interesting way certain characters of a franchise, of a director, can still tie in with certain aspects of previous movies and things like that. Because again, the backstory behind the Freddy Krueger character is that of like a child molester or a rapist, like stuff like that, which goes all the way back to not only Hills Have Eyes, but of course, Last House on the Left. So it's very, very crazy when it comes to those little nuances that can tie in to a director's just overall, style, or just the points that they drive home when it comes to just little consistencies, little like Easter eggs, as a lot of people kind of tie them in. And so we could talk about Nightmare on Elm Street all night long. But as we continue on, let's talk about a movie we've reviewed and we've talked about, actually, a very, very favorite movie of myself. but also a fun movie in general because it has one of my earliest crushes in that movie of Buffy the Vampire, but really known as Christy Swanson, and that is Deadly Friend.
Yeah, like I said, that's the next big movie that he does. And like I said, we have already discussed our Deadly Friend episode. So if you want to hear more about Deadly Friend, go back and rewatch that one. But yeah, I mean, I love that movie. It's such a cool movie, but it's crazy contrastical wise, when you play it from, older West movies. If Freddy Krueger hadn't been done, Deadly Friend I think would be take a little bit more serious. But because of the fact that he just did Nightmare on Elm Street, which was such a huge marketing genius and such a great movie overall by fans of just movies in general, not just horror fans, but so many people. I mean, Freddy Krueger is, I mean, especially now, is so iconic.
Yeah.
There's not one person in the world, little kids who've never even probably seen the movie know who he is. Old people who don't watch horror movies know who Freddy Krueger. Everybody knows who Freddy Krueger is. So I kind of feel like, Deadly Friend. I mean, I love this movie, doesn't get the love that it needs to get, only because it's sort of the underbelly of riding that wave of Freddy Krueger still in Nightmare on Elm Street one. But then, go ahead.
Oh no, you're totally right. The thing I'll be honest about, because again, like you, I love this movie, is I do think it owes a certain amount of gratitude to the success of Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
Because not to discredit the movie and not to, take anything away from Wes, who has already become Wes, this movie could hurt some directors because it's so weird, and it's got these really weird tweak scenes with not only Christie's character, the abusive father accidentally killing her, the best friend turning her basically into a robot with the little brain, keypad thing, all the way into the very bizarre fully becoming a robot at the end of the movie that doesn't make any sense, frankly, whatsoever. That she was, for lack of a better term, human the entire movie, with the exception of basically having a microchip in her brain, to suddenly becoming a full-on, down-to-the-bone circuits robot at the end of the movie. It's so fun, and I love it, and I'll always fight for this movie because it really is a good time. But I do feel like there is a certain amount of gratitude that it needs to give to Nightmare on Elm Street for being so great, that a campy, slightly more, almost closer to C rate movie still kept the West train on the tracks.
Yeah, definitely. And then, continuing on too with that, it gets into, sort of a combination of things that we've done before and we talked before with, with George Romero episode. We talked about him being the godfather of zombies, but him never considering them zombies, they were ghouls. Goes right into Wes's next movie, which is 100% a zombie movie,
Yep.
but doesn't market it as a zombie movie because it's not the zombies that we've come accustomed to, which is Serpent and the Rainbow, which is more of your voodoo traditional zombie movie. And it stars Bill Pullman, who, I mean, everybody knows who Bill Pullman is, Independence Day and all that great stuff. But this was actually his first movie diving into the horror sort of genre.
Yeah, no, 100%, and it's crazy too because it deals, so much more in that, like it's filmed in Haiti and then eventually goes to the Dominican Republic, but it's completely based off of that Haitian, New Orleans underbelly of like voodoo style, almost kind of like modern day bath salts kind of thing, where it's that that is that zombie-ish reference. It goes all the way back to Bela Lugosi and White Zombie and stuff like that, where it's not all about being bitten by the infected. Sometimes it's based more around a curse. But just like you said, bro, it's 100% a zombie movie. But you're somebody like you and me, or others of our peers in the horror ranking reviewing genres, will understand that if we were to do a top 10, a top 20 zombie movie, this is going to be in it.
Yeah,
Countdown.
yeah.
This is absolutely going to be in it. Where again, you and I regularly talk about the horror, just general populace. That I can't honestly say that I would see this movie in, or at least not particularly high on a lot of the general populace's zombie movies, because they're going to think specifically of the Return of the Living Dead's, the Night of the Living Dead's, the 28 Days Later, the things like that that are known to be zombies, and forget that Haitian voodoo is one of the oldest forms of zombieism.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's literally the where the term zombie comes from, is this like drug infused state, which basically, Bill Pullman's character is learning, in this movie, his character is supposed to go down to figure out about this guy that had been dead for 30 years or 40 years, is now back up and walking around and stuff like that, and he's trying to figure it out, and he's finding this underbelly of the voodoo areas and stuff like that, and kind of finds himself on the wrong end of the stick,
Yeah.
and gets a little bit of that little dust into him. It turns him into a zombie for a little bit. But yeah, like I said, that that term zombie was always used in more of that traditional sense of you're alive but you're dead. So when the coroners check your pulse is so low and so weak that it doesn't register. So you're basically considered clinically dead, and then now they can go and unbury you and basically kind of bid you to do whatever they want to do, because you're kind of in this drug state where you'll follow orders and do stuff. So I mean, that's sort of what this movie is basically about, is about him just trying to investigate this voodoo side of things, and it doesn't work too well for him for a little while. I mean, eventually, if you watch the movie, he does get out of it, but it's like I said, to me, I think it's one of the better movies that has to do with this, with, like you said, the traditional sense of what a zombie was like, and just like, it's one of these ones where, like, movies that kind of made you think like maybe you should have just left things left alone, and don't go sticking your nose where it doesn't belong.
And that's the thing about Serpent in the Rainbow, dude. I mean, it's so like out there. Like we talk about zombies, we talk about like all that kind of Living Dead type stuff. But it's really cool, like we discussed, to see, you know, really kind of the real version of what zombies can be with the history that goes back into, you know, Haitian voodoo and all that kind of stuff. So it's always like super cool. And I will tell you though, one final thought about Serpent in the Rainbow before we move along is I always thought that the poster dude was one of the most like bitchin' posters, dude. Of that dude like kind of coming out of like the coffin like screaming. I always thought that was so sick.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's always a cool artwork, and like I said, it kind of like reminds you of those old days past, with where posters kind of told you what the movie was about without telling you what the movie was about. So you kind of knew what you were going into when you saw that poster.
Yeah, man, 100% for sure. But let's continue along and let's I say that let's shock them, devil, with our deviant behavior.
Oh yeah, it's time for the shocker. Not this shocker, but a different kind of shocker. You know,
The
we're
chair.
talking about we're talking about going in the chair, getting a little bit of riding the lightning, gonna meet God.
Absolutely, man, for sure. You know, a little bit of shock me from Ace Frehley all up in there. But yeah, dude, I mean, the funniest thing about Shocker, I love Shocker, like first and
Yeah,
foremost.
yeah.
I just think that movie's so awesome. But like it it had so it had to do so much work to be a regular rated movie.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it said. If we look into it, I think it was like 13 times or so many times they had to go, for the ratings board to get an R-rated movie, which I guess, in a sense I kind of understand, but I think a lot of it just has to do with how over the top, his character is, which a lot of people will know from primarily from the X-Files, but he is, I guess because of how loose the tongue and the cheek and tongue kind of like going back to, Wes Craven kind of doing the comedy sort of part aspect of Nightmare on Elm Street, where this character was kind of like that too, where he had all these like one-liners in this movie that was like probably one of my favorite parts of the whole entire movie is the kind of off remarks that he does throughout the movie.
Yeah, and it's funny because we discussed earlier about like, Wes, like a lot of directors, has their favorites, but also it's interesting too when you see directors that have ways of like intertwining movies of theirs that don't even like go together. So we talked about like, the ways that like his early movies found a way to like tie in together. And the funny thing about this movie in Shocker is you've got a character who's who's just as evil to a certain degree, but is completely different than Freddy Krueger, but has that just same raw sense of humor, that just kind of unsettling, kind of fuck your feelings kind of sense of humor with like those just one-liners and like offhanded comments where you kind of can't help but be a little bit like, oh, I don't even know if that would pass nowadays. It's just kind of interesting. It's just another example of like the way that Wes finds a way to intertwine his work.
Yeah, yeah, and even with this one, like you were talking about, with the Freddy Krueger being able to invade your dreams in this movie, with the character getting electrocuted and kind of becoming one with electricity, and he's able to like put himself into different kind of like, like outlets and TVs and stuff like that. Kind of gave him that sort of like, that supernatural kind of advantage, kind of like Freddy. Everybody's gonna fall asleep, so Freddy's gonna get you one way or another because there's no way to not sleep. And kind of like in this movie, it's almost impossible to get away from this guy because everybody, especially nowadays even more, but in that time with the 80s, and that's when technology was starting to get a little bit more, and everybody was starting to have a lot more. You had more TVs in your house at the time. You had a lot more stuff, so it almost kind of made him sort of like a god. And which, what happens if you give somebody who is a deranged serial killer that kind of power? They're just gonna go ape shit with it and just have fun with it.
100%, man. And the thing that's also kind of fun too is, we often talk about casting, and Wes Craven's son is in this movie, but so is Kane Roberts, which
Yeah,
I think is kind of interesting because for anybody who's unfamiliar with Kane Roberts, this isn't like him being in movies is not a foreign concept. He's actually got quite the acting pedigree. But the thing that I find just kind of funny is at that time, I believe, he either is still there or was there or had just left the band, but he was in Alice Cooper for a long time. And I believe he was still in the band at the time, but even if he wasn't, the reason I bring that up because it gives me a chuckle is one of the main songs of Shocker is No More Mr. Nice Guy, but it's done by Megadeth.
yeah. Yeah, it is kind of funny. It's like, we're gonna put this song from a band named Alice Cooper, and we're gonna have a guy in it that, had worked with Alice Cooper. Like I said, whether or not he was still, can't remember at that time, like you said, if he was still with Cooper or not, but at least has worked with Cooper before. And then we're just gonna play this, completely off the wall, other band doing a version of this song.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about with Kane though, I mean that's what's cool about him, as not only as a musician, but like you said, as an actor, the dude looks badass. I mean,
Yeah.
he still looks badass now. Like how freaking, I mean, he was made for, I mean, not disregarding his musical talent and stuff like that. This dude was made for horror movies slash action movies. I mean, he's built like a brick house.
Yes.
And so it's like, so it's, him being in the movies, is no, especially in the 80s where, you had a lot of those, action heroes were all big and lumpy, big dudes, like burly guys. And
Yeah.
like I said, yeah, him being in it. But yeah, I always made a giggle where it was like, yeah, we're gonna play a song that's known by Alice Cooper, but we're gonna have this band called Megadeth do it.
And it's hilarious too, because like you were saying about Kane, the dude's built like Rambo, but is also known for playing a guitar that's shaped like a machine gun,
Yeah,
which I just think is so hilarious. Because that's the one thing. And look, like we said, like Kane has an amazing musical pedigree. Like it's very excellent. But 100%, he doesn't really look though like a guy, with the exception of maybe Manowar. He doesn't look like a guy who would be in a rock band or be a rock star. Because just like
yeah,
you said, he looks like he's just bred for cinematic glory.
yeah,
Because he's yeah, like I said, it just looks like Rambo on guitar. But
yeah.
it's just, I mean, it's funny, but it's cool. And again, Fangs, we're not taking cheap shots at the guy. It's just, he's just got that look where he's not what you would think of out of that time, where you're going to look at Nikki Sixx and be like, oh, well, of course. Kane,
Especially with Alice Cooper, because
yeah,
Alice Cooper's so tall and skinny and lanky. And like you said, if you didn't know he was in that and you said, "Oh, I'm a musician," you would assume that he was some shitty, probably LA band that nobody has ever heard of band or something like that.
yeah,
And then, then you're like, "No, I'm Alice Cooper's a guitar player." And you're like, "What?" Like, this big ass burly dude is, contrast to like I said, with Alice being so tall and
yeah.
slender and skinny. But yeah, he was definitely built for the camera.
Absolutely, it was. It totally was, man. And as we continue on, let's take a trip back in time. Let's
Oh
cel-
yeah,
let's celebrate Father's Day.
yeah, we're going back to the dads again. Yeah, so yeah, obviously, you're working our way down the list of Wes Craven movies, and then the next one up after Shocker is The People Under the Stairs, which, uh, you know, I honestly think it's probably one of my probably top five uh um Wes Craven movies. We'll figure that out because like, at the end of this episode we will do our top five and we'll make one. But yeah, I mean, I'll definitely put a ploy on whether I'm going to put that in there. But I love People Under the Stairs. We've talked about People Under the Stairs. I think it's just a great movie. It's got that, that early 90s, comedy, action sort of, who done it kind of thriller killer. And then the crazy stuff that's in that movie is, all the sadistic, stuff that the dad's into and the gimpness. And that kind of was like a thing back then, started with, you've got, this movie, you got Pulp Fiction that came out in the early 90s with the gimp. So kind of like brought out that, this kind of world of the S&M world that had been around forever, but now is starting to get put into these movies in the 90s where you have this kind of like resurgence of this, this sexual lifestyle. But yeah, like we said, we've talked about People on the Stairs, and I love this movie, and it's definitely one of a favorite of the Wes Cravens.
Absolutely, for sure. And we are also, for what it's worth, Fangs, Devil and I are actually eyeballing a con in the future that's going to have some People Under the Stairs people at it. So that's actually pretty cool, brother.
Yeah. We're going to be doing a con in the Baltimore, Maryland area that's going to have a few of the actors from people on the stairs. So look forward to some possible interviews with some of those cast members coming along for the site.
Absolutely, for sure. And so, as we, scuttle out of the house and avoid the people under the stairs, we are going to get caught up in a whole new nightmare. So
Yeah.
let's return ourselves back to the series when it comes to Wes, at least, as far as we're concerned. And we're not far away from getting into the other of these series. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think it can really be argued that Freddy and Nightmare is the series. So let's intertwine ourselves in a whole new nightmare.
Yeah. When it came to doing this Wes Craven one, I mean, like I said, we could talk about all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and there being so many of them. And it's like, so many people know and love these series that it's kind of like, you know, talked about so much. So I was like, you know what? When I go into doing these reviewings and talking about Wes Craven's career, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go right into New Nightmare just because out of all the Freddy Krueger ones, I wouldn't go as far as saying this is my favorite one, but it's probably my favorite as far as story wise. It's such a cool concept because anybody who hasn't seen it, it's basically like, these Nightmare on Elm Street movies were movies like to us and to everybody that knows. But even in this movie, those were movies. Robert Englund is an actor. Heather Langenkamp is an actor. Wes Craven is, this writer and director, and it kind of just brings this like demon entity that just kind of liked the image and the style and loved what Freddy Krueger, this, character represented, that it kind of latched itself and took Freddy Krueger's shape and form and kind of made it even scarier. And it was one of the makeups that even Robert Englund said that he loved this makeup because it is kind of more of like a meaner, angrier, more demonic version of Freddy Krueger, because it's not really Freddy Krueger, it's this demon entity.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's funny, Devil, because you're right. Like, it took me a second to get into New Nightmare when I would watch it back in the day. Like, I was really hard on that movie at first. I did like the concept right away because it was one of my first real tastes of like a real life horror movie. Taking your work home, as the saying often is. But I had to get used to the look of Freddy in this, and it took me personally a few watches to become kind of okay with it. And I'm not overly prima donna-ish when it comes to the look of things, with the exception of I kind of need certain things to stay the same. It's just kind of what I'm used to, like I'm a big Friday the 13th guy. Everybody knows that. And Jason has never fully looked the same in every movie, but the genesis of his character has never really changed, whether it be the jumpsuit / button-up shirt, khaki dicky pants kind of thing with the mask and so on and so forth. But anyway, it took me a while to get behind it. I actually started understanding things a little bit better actually when I rewatched the movie years ago after hearing what Robert, like how positively he felt about that role. And it allowed me to kind of watch the movie from like a different side of my brain. And I definitely get it because like I didn't love the whole claw hand thing. It just seemed very Wolverine to me. I didn't like it. I'm used to basically a removable glove, a torture device that he created to torture children with and stuff like that. Like I was used to this thing that he put on his hand, not this thing that's like a part of his hand, where even though it's detachable, but the chainsaw on Ash's hand for Evil Dead is kind of considered like, part of his arm. But it was just kind of something I had to kind of get used to. But yeah, I liked the idea of Robert playing Robert, Heather playing Heather, and Wes playing Wes. It just took me a second to kind of get a little bit used to the Freddy character and that way, because he's also coming out of like different weird locations, almost very Pennywise-ish, and so it didn't rub me the wrong way, but it was harder for me to really get rah about when it almost seemed like they were using ideas that I was used to something else. Even though like New Nightmare and It, Stephen King's It, are actually very close
Yeah.
in release times. But it was just kind of this. I don't know. I was used to Freddy Krueger having this kind of stalker vibe, of course, because that's what his character was always based on. But his character seemed just so much more stalkery, a little bit more rapey in this movie for me. But I think that was also because it's such an important part of this particular telling of the story, where it is that bringing your work home, and it kind of fits for that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of interesting, like little nitbits, little bits of information that's pretty cool about this movie too. With like the blur line between reality and fiction. One the funny thing about it, the credit. If you go through the credit, that Freddy Krueger is actually credited as himself in this movie, which was kind of funny. But the whole beginning of this movie, it talks about Heather Langenkamp having the stalker calling her all the time, sending her letters and stuff like that, which she actually did have, after making some of the nightmares, she actually did have a stalker trying to call her all the time. So it was kind of like, them bringing that into the real life kind of stuff. And then there's, you have the art, imitating other art. And I like it because in this movie you have, her son in this movie is Miko Hughes, which
Yeah.
everybody knows as the little adorable from Pet Cemetery.
Yes.
And in this movie, he's trying to go home, and he's in this like trance, like Freddy Krueger trance, and he's going across the highway, and a red truck almost runs him over, which is kind of funny because he got ran over by a truck
Can
in
we
Pet
keep him
Cemetery.
out of traffic,
Yeah.
please?
So I kind of felt like that was kind of like a nod to, I mean, I would imagine, it's like, hey, we have this actor, and oh, hey, like, yeah, maybe he auditioned for the role, and we're like, oh yeah, because I mean, Miko Hughes, and especially at that time he was doing that, you got that, you've got Kidner, Corner Cop. The kid was like a really good pro actor for being such a
Yeah.
young kid. Like everybody said that he was such a great to work with because even though he was super young, even in Pet Cemetery, he's like 2 or 3 in Pet Cemetery, and he said that people said that he was like better than most seasoned actors. But yeah, I just thought it was kind of funny. It's like, okay, so he's in this movie. You're like, oh well, we have this scene where he's going across that, and you're like, oh yeah, we should make him almost get hit by a red truck just to kind of see if the horror fans are paying attention a little bit.
No, and I definitely noticed that when I watched the movie for the first time too. I was like, wait, what? For real? Can we just keep him out of traffic?
Yeah,
Like, it's so weird, man. But I did like the nod. I thought it was cool, and minimal kill count in this movie. 4 adults. No children were harmed in the making of
yeah,
this movie.
yeah. And then, we go from, a lot of people don't think that, this new nightmare, a lot of people, like you said, that was said it kind of had like a divide. People didn't like it. Some people liked it. Some people thought it was kind of odd. But I mean, it was still, like I said, I defend New Nightmare. I think it was a good movie. I liked it when it came out. I thought it was better than some of the other nightmares. Was it as good as Nightmare One? No, but you're not gonna beat the original. But then, he goes, from this movie to, into your realm of vampires, with probably one of the worst vampire movies in the entire world, with Vampire in
Vampire in
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
There's only one good part of this whole entire movie, which is in the very first 5 minutes of the movie. There's a guy going, "Ahoy! I said, ahoy, motherfucker. That's literally the only part of the movie I like. The rest of this movie is complete trash. And like I said, when you're a director and you're a director for so long and things keep going your way and coming your way, you're going to have hits. You're going to have flops, just like musicians. You're going to have a hit. You're going to have songs that aren't that great. And, this happens to be one of Wes's flops, I feel.
No, 100%. Does it exist in my vampire collection? Yeah, absolutely, it does. But am I gonna protect this movie? Fuck no. It's just not good. Like,
Yeah.
and the thing is, the cast is solid enough. I mean, I've never been the world's biggest Eddie Murphy fan, but I like a good
I'm a huge
collection
Eddie
of his
Murphy
movies.
fan.
I mean, I've seen clips, but I'm not familiar overly with his stand-up specials in Raw and Delirious, but I have been told how good they are. I know how well he did in what was the cop movies?
Beverly Hills.
Beverly Hills Cop. Those were cool. But then there's other stuff that I definitely do like that he did, in Our Realm. I liked The Haunted Mansion. I thought that movie was very well done. I thought it was a lot of fun with a great cast. I enjoyed the Nutty Professor movies. Mrs. Vamp loves those movies too, and we watch them on the regular. And I've heard good things about Life, and I've heard and Coming to America has always been pretty much a gold standard for comedy movies. I got more burnt out with him with just the excessive amount of movies where he's playing multiple characters. And after a while, those movies for me just can't have the same impact. They just don't work when I'm just seeing the same guy on my screen every time, every 5 minutes as a new character, whatever. It starts working against me. But anyway, bringing it back on Vampire in Brooklyn. Again, Angela Bassett's in the movie. I think that she's very established, incredibly skilled. She played Tina Turner. She was in Waiting to Exhale. She was in Mr. 3000. A lot of cool movies, a lot of stuff I like. Again, she's not high up on my fandom, but at the same time, I'm not gonna look a gift horse in the mouth or discredit a skilled person. It's just not my cup of tea. But the overall design of the movie is okay. You can see they're trying to kind of do this little spin off of, early traditional vampirism. But where Dracula Dead and Loving It excelled in every way, shape, or form, Vampire in Brooklyn basically failed in just every way, shape, and form. The flow would get interrupted. The way they would try to put in the one-liners didn't have the same impact. It was almost kind of like a been there, done that, and we did it better. But again, there is some charm to this movie because it does deserve a little bit of credit as the continuation of the exploitation genre that Blackula did very well. And again, the sequels always do tend to struggle. So while Blackula Scream is not a bad movie by any means, it definitely doesn't have the staying power that Blackula did when those exploitation movies were really on the rise. But yeah, it's like what you said, bud. It's just not good. And Wes has earned the benefit of the doubt. And he's earned that, like, even the greatest, hitter in baseball is going to have a slump at some point. It's just the way it is. They're going to have a game where instead of, going 3 for 4, they go, 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts. It's just kind of it just happens.
Yeah.
So look, I appreciate the attempt. I appreciate the work in my genre. But I just can't protect this movie because there's nothing to protect. It's just not solid. That's just kind of the way it is.
Yeah, yeah, and the crazy thing about with Wes Craven, what we're gonna get into, is that Wes Craven is one of those directors that, like, you can have a flop and go and then all of a sudden, like we talked about earlier with The Hills Have Eyes too. Is it as good as Hills Have Eyes 1? No, I think it's a mediocre film. And then what happens? Bam! Nightmare on Elm Street
Yep.
tears up the damn industry again. Here you have Vampire in Brooklyn, obviously a flop. You know, what's Wes Craven do? Shutters it off. All of a sudden goes Scream, motherfuckers, and makes another huge franchise that even today is still blowing up. I mean, there are fans from multi generations of this film that are going in. I mean, there's kids now that are going that are 14 years old, 13-year old that just seen the new Screams that are going back and watching the old Screams. And it's like, and you thought that his Nightmare on Elm Street, career was huge. And I'm not saying that Nightmare on Elm Street isn't a huge
Yeah.
franchise. I think, and it's not my opinion because I think the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise is a better franchise, but Scream is his more lucrative money wise franchise. It's definitely the bigger franchise as far as like fandom and how much impact it's done throughout the world and about this and people nowadays where people like Freddy Krueger and love those movies and I love those movies and I'm not as big of a Scream guy as some other people, but like I said, how many people that are 12 years old, 13-year-old that are excited about Freddy Krueger now? Only if their parents were probably into Freddy Krueger as much. Or Scream, like I said, they just came out with a new Scream last year or a year or two ago. They got a new Scream that's coming out again. So it's just one of those franchises that from the first Scream that came out in the 90s to now, it's still, even with Wes passing away, it's still a franchise that is gonna, whether it's for the good or for the bad. I mean, I guess it depends on whose opinion you're talking to. Me personally, I didn't really like the newer Screams that came out, but apparently a lot of people did because it's still huge and people are still, excited about the next Scream that's getting ready to come out.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right about that. And I think there's a lot of correct in what you say, what you just said. While I definitely stand by everything I was saying previously about, in my opinion, Nightmare on Elm Street is the franchise with a capital V. When it comes to Wes, shit, dude, the staying power now of Scream is pretty epic. The funny thing is, Nightmare on Elm Street has had that overall longevity to it that, with the exception of Jack Earl Haley's Nightmare on Elm Street, hasn't had any type of follow-up in any way, but still is considered and admired as a dominant franchise 30 years later. Scream kind of had run its course in the first three. Loved the first one. Second one, very solid. Third one, I thought it fell a little flat because I thought it got a little too campy, a little too cheeky with when they tried to tie it in to Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Which, don't get me wrong, dude, we love our Kevin Smith. But it was kind of weird. It made sense to see Wes and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. But it was a little bit bizarre having Jay and Silent Bob show up in the movie Scream as Jay and Silent Bob. But it's all good. But that movie had kind of laid dormant. Those movies had kind of laid dormant for a little while as a trilogy. And it just kind of stopped. People still definitely liked it. We go to regular cons and Matthew Lillard's always at them and Rose McGowan shows up, periodically, and Nev Campbell, especially also with The Craft, is a regular at that kind of stuff. And then the fourth one came out, and I remember really enjoying it and being like, okay, this works. They obviously took their time to not make it just look like a money grab restart of a franchise. I thought it could have ended at the fourth movie, which Wes did as well, and that could have been cool. But man, the fifth, sixth, and seventh, and while they're cool, and solid enough, well, fifth and sixth currently, seventh coming out, Um, they're not without their charm, but I don't need to run to the theater to see them like right when they come out. I'm not really an opening day guy anyway, but for a movie or franchises I care about, I would like to see them in the first week. I would like to find a way to do that. But those latter screams, the more recent ones, I was comfortable enough catching them, within the first month, within the first 2 months, whenever I kind of made time for it.
Yeah.
But dude, like I said, you and I regulate these cons, and the merch that I've seen of these fans' posters that are just autographed to death. Not that I haven't seen that with Nightmare, but I feel like Nightmare is a little bit more per movie dominant, where people are dedicated to the first movie. They want all of those. Like I said earlier, I'm very loyal in particular to my love of Dream Warriors. So I'm very into that. I don't have one, but if I decided that I really wanted to commit to an autographed Nightmare poster, that's what I would kind of like to go after, is particularly the Dream Warriors movie. I really loved the cast. But man, these Scream cats are just all about it, man. Posters just top to bottom with everybody who's been in the movie. It could have been like the pizza guy that came over to the house at like the 37-minute mark and then was gone by the 37.10 second minute mark or whatever.
Yeah.
And they still would get that person and stuff. It's really definitely amazing. So while I still consider Nightmare the franchise, the staying power and just mixed with resurgence of his legacy, but just what Ghostface now seems to represent is definitely on a level of crazy, and honestly, I'm down for it.
Yeah. Like I said, when we were talking about the newer ones, I remember me and you, we went and saw Scream 5. And like I said, I liked it. I mean, it wasn't overly like yeah about it,
Yeah,
but I thought it was decent. And until they decided to do 6, that's when I kind of didn't like 5 nearly as much. Then, if they would have ended it at 5, I would have liked 5 a lot more. But then they had to add 6, and I'm like, well, this is just kind of I don't know. And like I said, it got so bad that even in the 6th one, Nev Campbell was like, nah, I'm good.
that's the crazy thing about that too, is like Nev had always been in some way, shape, or form, whether she was the star or the secondary star, or even just a third party vendor, as I like to refer to it. She was involved. It was very bizarre to see the announcement that due to whatever reasonings, financial, script, whatever, that Nev has decided that she doesn't want to return, which is crazy to me because I was like, that's your draw, like that's your person, that's your Heather Langenkamp, and you found a way to not make her feel welcome in the series anymore. That's crazy. And it turned out to be true when I did eventually watch the movie. But the one thing I will say about the sixth Scream is it got very bloodlusty in that movie. Like, the one thing about Scream is, of course, yes, while there was blood in that movie, the blood was always very applicable. You know what I mean? Like in the first movie, not only just the fake blood part when they're talking about, where Skeet and Matthew are talking about the pig's blood and Carrie, but the actual stabs of each other, also mixed with the other movies, the blood seemed very applicable. It made sense. It wasn't overbearing, and it was believable. Man, that sixth movie seemed to just get very bloodlusty. It was like I was watching Friday the 13th. It was like, you know what? We're just gonna lop off heads in this movie, and we're just gonna paint the town red.
Yeah,
Which was
yeah, and
which was very just off character for the movie. It was like off.
yeah, and just like a boomerang or a seesaw, we're talking about Wes Craven, up and downs. We go right into the cursed werewolf movie, which we've talked about that. The episode will be coming out before this episode comes out, but there's you know a little cry for the vampire going with that one. But yeah, another movie
Felt good
where I
about that
remember.
pick, man, until I actually revisited it, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh shit.
Yeah, yeah, but then again, it's another one of those ones. You got Wes, and this is kind of at this point of Wes's career, it kind of is sort of the end of his career, and the end of his career to me, in my opinion, is kind of a sour note. It kind of goes downhill where you have Cursed, and then you have Red Eye, which I liked Red Eye. Red Eye wouldn't be considered a horror film, so a lot of people who were talking, it's more of your action thriller. It's got Cillian Murphy and it's pretty cool. It's, if you haven't seen it, it's pretty awesome.
I like that one.
It's basically like a serial killer movie sort of, but trapped on an airplane.
Yeah, like
You know,
hostage movie.
yeah, so I mean, to me, it was really, really good. And then going into the finale of Wes Craven movie with My Soul to Take, which, other than Vampire in Brooklyn, I think is the worst movie that Wes Craven's directed. Even some of those other ones throughout the years that were bombs, and even some of those further movies and stuff like that, the Screams and all that. I think other than Vampire in Brooklyn, which in my opinion is probably the worst of
Yeah,
all
for
the
the
Wes
record,
Craven
if you and
movies.
I did like an underworld showdown and we put Cursed versus Vampire in Brooklyn, Cursed is winning.
Yeah. So yeah, I would definitely, yeah, if we definitely had to put like the bottom five of Wes's career, definitely Vampire in Brooklyn, and definitely Cursed is on there, and definitely that last one, My Soul to Take. It was just it was kind of just, I mean, I don't know if it was Wes or producers or people. It was just trying to capitalize on some of those gems that he had with these teenage movies, with the Nightmare, because those were all teenagers. The Screams, those were teenagers kind of movies. Where My Soul to Take is another one that's like a very teenage. But yeah, I don't know if it was just the script or the acting or just everything all together. That one just felt fat, which unfortunately, like I said, that's his last movie, and we love Wes, and like I said, even with the ups and downs, you know, we, I'm not gonna let his last movie be his legacy. But some
No,
people talk about you're only as good as your last hit. But I mean, I think when it comes to directors and stuff like that, especially at that time, what I mean, he didn't need to do anything. He probably was like, maybe they gave him offer he couldn't refuse, or like, oh shit, man, we want you to direct this movie. Here's a gazillion dollars, do it. And, "Oh, okay, sure." So I don't, not 100% sure what the story of is it, but yeah, it to me, you know it's a dull moment, which is the last film that he did. Unfortunately, just kind of like leaves that kind of like sour taste in your mouth a little bit. But
yeah,
then again, like I said, I mean, he's given us enough work throughout his career that we've talked about this, that he can have those Cursed, he can have the Vampire in Brooklyn, he can have the My Soul to Take, he can have The Hills Have Eyes too in those movies, and yet still be considered one of, if not the master of horror.
absolutely, 100%. And that's the thing. In my opinion, like your last does not define your legacy. That's why they call it a legacy. We can have an opinion where it's like, okay, yeah, that's a bit of a black eye. That's kind of a bummer, or that's kind of a sad way to end. When now we don't get we had two amazing like follow-ups to bad movies. We had like we talked about, we had Hills into Nightmare, and then we had Vampire into Scream. Unfortunately, we don't get that potential makeup, but that's the reason why it's called a legacy. And his legacy is so just consistently good that a couple things like that, I can't hold that against him. I can't look at something like that and be like, damn, Wes Craven should have been bigger, but man, he fucked it all up with that. Nah, dude. Like currently, right now, there's a lot of people just tearing apart the new Bon Jovi record for a comparison. But I'm sure that John is honestly not overly stressed while he's still sitting on his billions of dollars of gold and jewelry that he's got at his mansion, at his house, from the legacy of great work that Bon Jovi had put out over their history. It's kind of that same way. Look, okay, My Soul to Take didn't do well. We didn't like it. Red Eye was cool enough. It's just not a horror movie, but it's cool enough. And, you know, the other stuff is a little bit kind of like, it gets a little bit wishy-washy again. Maybe there's script problems. Maybe somebody just drove a dump truck of money up to his house, and we were like, we want Wes Craven on our roster. So it could be something as simple as that. But, again, Nightmare, Scream, The Hills Have Eyes, like all of the Shocker, People Under the Stairs, like, etc. The estate that's in charge of Wes Craven, whether it's his children or whoever, whatever, they're not going to have to worry. Like, they're going to be getting residuals from Nightmare, Scream, and all that stuff forever. And that's the legacy that he earned, because he's an easily quality 90% awesome director.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, yeah. I mean, some of his work is, like I said, personally, one of my favorite movies, if not just even horror movies, just movies in general. Some of my favorite ones. So that's what I said. Like when we do these like director movies, yeah, we're gonna talk about a little bit of other stuff that maybe not horror related to them, and we're gonna add the hits, but we're not gonna jack up directors so much that we're not going to talk a little bit about some of their misses, because like you said, sometimes with those misses might light a fire up someone's ass, and maybe that's what they did, like you said, with these movies, with the flops, and then all of a sudden these huge two franchises that came after flops kind of maybe lit a fire in Wes's ass to kind of like get something out there to make a legacy. And that's like you said, unfortunately with this last one that he did, he passed away. Maybe who knows if he could have lived lived a little longer, maybe he could have got another huge franchise. But then maybe not, maybe he might have got stuck doing more flops. So, we'll never know, unfortunately. But yeah, overall, you know an A minus is still an A.
Absolutely, 100%. Because you never know. Robert Englund has since, retired from the Freddy role, officially. Really just citing his body. He's like, I'm an old man now. Like, that's a very physically demanding role that I can't do anymore. But, it's been, almost 10 years now without Wes. But who knows? Maybe 5 years ago, though, if Wes was still with us, maybe we get that one more Freddy movie with Robert. Not saying that the Jackie movie didn't have to be made. It can still exist, But maybe we get that one final just coup de grace moment of Wes and Robert together in the makeup with the glove, just terrorizing, the town and the children one more time. So who knows? Maybe it was easier for Robert to officially be like, I'm done because I physically can't do it. Also mixed with the fact that he's like, yeah, well, my mate's not here either. So it's definitely possible when it comes to that. But Wes, we hold you in the highest regards, man. Cheers to you, Wes Craven. Absolutely, you've given us so much, and so much that we will continue to watch. So, Fangs, we appreciate you guys. We really hope that you've enjoyed our talk of the history, the iconic legacy that was, is, and for always shall be Wes Craven. Horns up, Fangs out.
The part of the show where we honor those who have passed away, who have worked with the great and late Wes Craven, David Hess, and Fred Lincoln from The Last House on the Left, Lewis Gordon from The Swamp Thing, John Saxon from Nightmare on Elm Street, Anne Ramsey from Deadly Friend, Zakes McCaw from Serpent in the Rainbow, and Bill Cobbs from People Under the Stairs. Lost but never forgotten.
Devil, my friend.
What's up?
You like announcements?
Oh yeah.
I like announcements. Thanks. We know you like announcements. We have an announcement. Devil, what do we have to tell them?
Oh yeah, we want to tell you that Rockin' Horror is the official sponsor of Vampire and Devil Podcast. Oh yeah. You want to buy our shit? Go online at rockinhorror.com and buy our shit.
Absolutely. At special events that you will always know about where the devil is present and the vampire is floating around, you will be able to get official vampire and devil merchandise. We will make sure of that. We will make sure you know about that. But for all of you gothic peeps, all of you fangs, all of you infernos that want to shop online, we are going to allow you to go to rockinhorror.com to get all of your official vampire and devil merchandise.
Oh yeah, it's time to get bloody, get messy, and wear the shit that we like to wear.
Absolutely. Horns up, fangs out. Thank you, Rockin' Horror Apparel, and thank you, Mark and Janet.
Oh yeah.